Hey everybody, we're back. Where did we leave off on our quest for answering everything and having everything answered? We left off with a certain David Chalmers, who I'm somewhat familiar with. I think he has a bit of a intellectual spat with maybe Daniel Dennett, if that sounds right. And anyway, talking about the nature of consciousness, intelligence, that kind of stuff. Anyway, David Chalmers is professor of philosophy and neuroscience, which I'm pretty sure has something to do with toenails. Co-director, Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness at NYU. That's not far from NYME. Distinguished Professor of Philosophy, Australian National U. Period. His last question is, how can we design a machine? This is a how question, not a why, not a when, not a how. It's like an engineering question. Engineering. How can we design a machine that can correctly answer every question, including this one? I've got an answer. You may not like it. Are you digging my groove? Uh, well, he's saying how, which basically presupposes that you can. So I'm supposed to answer this like, what are the technical specifications for designing that machine? But I gotta go back first because I don't think such a machine could, even in theory, be designed. The reason for that is that any question is, oh, well, then I'm going to run right into that. I want to say every question is context dependent, where typically we assume the context. Like, if I ask somebody it's raining, they're going to assume, is it raining where I live at this moment in time? Is all of the context that is bound up in that question. So a lot of times we just assume the context, but it's there. I'm of the mind, at least right now, that you can't so therefore even a question like how can we answer every question including this one is going to be dependent upon the context of the questioner, and therefore so the how doesn't come in because the is it possible isn't, no, it's not possible. Um, so is there are questions subjective even in a deterministic world? I'm I'm thinking that unless you're asking about the state of the entire system, like if you're asking, something, a question about the entire universe, then maybe you could get away with context. Maybe. Okay. Well, then what about what does 2 plus 2 equal? Is that dependent on context? It's funny that you. Why do I think a mathematician and a philosopher are going to just sit there and argue about this one? Let's approach it from another angle. How close could we get? How could we how can we design a machine that could make a really good stab at giving a satisfactory answer when delivered to a human to any question that that human could ask? Well, the design of the question answering machine must be able to incorporate into its system of answering. It must take the context of the question and the questioner, if every question must have a questioner, but it must be able to deduce the context for itself. I mean, it must be able to take as a variable the context of the question. There's literally no literal question. How would we design that machine? It'd have to understand the poetry of the question. It'd have to understand the archaeology of the question. It'd have to understand the purpose of the question. It'd have to understand and multiple types of purpose. You would have to what's the Latin phrase, know thyself? You'd have to know who the hell is asking a question, in order to know what they're really asking. The machine would have to know what information to ignore. No. The fuck does no mean? Beginning to think that consciousness has almost as much to do with ignoring information as it does with collecting it. What the hell is correct? What's the correct answer to the question, do these jeans make my ass look fat? What's the correct answer to that? Well, that is probably as close to a universal no as there is. How would we get close? You have to know the questioner as much as you can. There is something so fundamental about relationships, and I mean relationships in a very abstract way, that any machine would have to use, just the concept and the tools of defining relationships. Both, well, at least to define the context. So, let's imagine a universe that is deterministic, runs like a clock. We can step outside of it so we're not interfering with anything and just watch it go. And the entire universe is made of nothing but games of tic-tac-toe being played. Could we design a machine that could answer every question in that universe correctly? Like, who's going to win the next game that's played? Do you know all the rules? Do you know the context? Do you know everything that's happened? Do you know the rules in the past? I mean, I don't know. This gets into some strange shit like infinities and, maybe there is a simple enough universe in which you could design a machine that could answer all of the questions because Because you could model all of the relationships and understand the context. I'm out of focus. I'm in focus. I'm out of focus. Which is kind of the question. I can't give you the how because it isn't possible. Because in order to completely understand the context, you'd have to simulate every context. So the only machine would have to be able to access every possible universe, including the ones in which it doesn't exist in. Therefore, it could not have context. I'm just blowing sunshine at this point. I don't know. I fundamentally think that it can't be done. But I don't know. I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. Mr. Chalmers? You're a bastard. So the answer to how can we design a machine that can correctly answer every question, including this one, is that we cannot. But if we want to try and design a machine that does a half-assed decent job, you make it a very simple universe, or you make that machine love everybody and want to know everything about them. Okay. Leo M. Chalupa. He sounds delicious. Leo M. Chalupa is a neurobiologist, professor of pharmacology. And physiology at George Washington University. It's got to be outside of D.C., right? What is it? It's got to be. His last question, Leo M. Chalupa's last question is, what new methodology will be required to explain the neural basis of consciousness? What new methodology? Systemic framework, strategy. What new methodology, methods, what new methodology will be required to explain our brain's basis of consciousness? What mental tools and procedures will be required to explain the wet noodly appendage and its how we get consciousness out of a wet noodly appendage and this collection of synapses and neurons and corpus callosum and corpus callosum bag. That one. I just can't describe it in words. Sorry. Hmm. Well, I'm just going to say that consciousness isn't based on neurons. Bam. Can't give a good answer to a question? Crap on the question. So what are we trying to do? We're trying to go from, how do we go from like looking at an fMRI and seeing patterns of electrical excitation and de-excitation and to extrapolate that in, or to synthesize that into how do you go from me tapping my knee to the neural feeling of me tapping my knee, you know? Well, how do you go from a logic gate to a VR headset? How do you go from what is consciousness? Let's take the one part that I kind of like the way it sounds and say consciousness is an entity's ability to model itself. How does Claude Shannon come into the equation? At one level, how does, what would Dennett say? Then it would say consciousness is an epipen. Then it would say consciousness is an epiphenomenon just arising from the competition among in our brain, and not even centrally located at one specific point, but the consciousness is the winners of the competition for attention in the brain. That's what he would kind of say, right? So, what new methodology? You bring in fitness landscapes to I'm almost seeing like picturing consciousness as like, okay, you've got this, like, say like consciousness is everything over the sea level, okay? And everything under the sea level is like preconscious or subconscious. We'll call it subconscious because, hey, probably is how we should call it. But then if we look at the things that are conscious as kind of the peaks of fitness landscapes that are just poking into consciousness, how are those fitness landscapes created, maintained, and energized such that they can kind of poke through into our consciousness at points? You might even be able to get more general, because I sure as hell ain't being specific. It's synapse 12. You got to understand synapse 12. How specific is that? I think we have not brought evolutionary thinking nearly far enough into other realms of thought, of consciousness, of AI, of any of this stuff. If we just think about any area where there is, that is even connected to the possibility of differential reproductive success, mutation, the basics of any type of evolution. Any area where those thinking in those terms Okay, I'm gonna get something here. It may not be a new methodology, but it may be the reuse, the integration, maybe even hierarchical integration of viewing even the creation of consciousness, the development of consciousness in terms of fitness landscapes, in terms of not just talking at a biological level, talking on a neuronal level, talking on an informational level, talking on, you know, all those levels that get you from a logic gate up to VR. Thinking in evolutionary terms, evolutionary models, is not a new methodology, but it's I think, sorely underdeveloped branch. It's like we think of evolution as like, this is it works in the biological sphere with DNA. I mean, DNA, and then Dawkins is like, okay, well then maybe we got ideas, and it's like, okay, well, okay, yes, but it's like anything that can potentially reproduce, potentially mutate, potentially be conserved, or some element of it be conserved. That is what can be the that is what can be the intellectual framework that leaps hierarchies of abstraction, is thinking in evolutionary terms. So, got to think like we got to extend Darwin way past we've ever extended Darwin before. Okay. One more and then a break. Great question, Leo Chalupa. Okay, Ashvin Chabra, looks like. Ashvin Chabra, inventor, physicist, author of The Aspirational Investor. That's a nice idea. If I can determine what he means by that, and of course I can't, but let's just say it means something like we invest the things that we want to come true and we want to be better. So in some case by doing that we make it true. We manifest it. If there's anything in there that's like that. Oh, I'm so tired. I've been awake for hours. Let me try again. Ashvin Chabra, investor, physicist, author, The Aspirational Investor. His last question is there a fundamental difference between the biological world and the physical world? I'm going to answer this like the World Health Organization. I didn't get your question. No. China's doing great. Sorry, we got to go. Is there a fundamental difference between the biological world and the physical world? Well, I mean, the easy answer is biological. The biological world answers to Darwin, or it answers to fundamentals of it answers to a new set of laws that is fundamentally economic. I mean, economic in the broadest sense, not, you know. Whereas things in the physical world oh, things in the physical world must obey the laws of physics. Well, of course, because that's kind of definitional. Things in the biological world can't. Mm. Mm. It's almost like the biological world is just a way to hack physics. I mean, look, the answer to the question is yes, so I can just answer the question. Yes, there is. Um, the that's a narrow frickin' depth of field. You know, if I was 35 feet away, that depth of field would not be nearly that narrow. Islands in the stream. Back to this. Well, there is, and it's because you can't really talk about Darwinian selection, mutation, differential reproduction. It doesn't make sense to use those terms in the physical world, does it? I mean, well, what about nurseries of galaxies, nebular clusters? The physical world is the manifestation of the physical laws of the universe. The biological world is constrained by physical laws, but why don't I just want to say that The biological world is aware of time, whereas the physical world is slave to it. The physical world, the biological world has one more degree of freedom than whatever the physical world does. Christ, every mathematician that watch this would kill me for saying that. It doesn't make any sense. Is that a degree of freedom if it's something that can be used? It's like when the fish realizes it's in water and it can use that to its own ends. I'm going to say the biological world can hack time. The physical world can't hack time because it's an input. It's not a hackable feature. It's a bug, not a feature. Anyway, I had to take a break because I've answered these last few ones perfectly, and I don't want to screw up my... I'm on a roll. I'll be back. All right, well, while we're here. Jawan? Is it Jawan? Jawan or Jawan? Cho? Pretty sure I got that part right. Probably screwed that up too. Jawan or Jawion. Let's just say Dr. Cho. That I won't screw up. Professor of Environmental Engineering. United Nations IST. It's kind of related to the United Nations, but not really. It's just kind of IST. Director, Science, Walden Center. Dr. Cho's last question is, can we design a modern society without money which is at least as effective economically and politically as our current system? Well, what are you calling money, sir? I mean, I don't think you're talking about paper money. Or are you, the physical manifestation? When I think money, I just think this is what we've... I mean, it's a means of exchange, but it's also just it's like how you keep track. This is how we keep track economically in the parts of our lives that are impacted with that. I mean, okay, so what do we need in society? What do we need to live? Well, we're a social creature, so society is not being separate. Let's take 2020 and strip away everything we can. Look at it from 50,000 feet and say, okay, we need to be able to live together. We need to be able to procreate. We need to be able to eat. We need to be able to have shelter. We need to be able to communicate. We need to be able to have not everything fall apart. Do we need to keep score? Bottom of the ninth. Existence 2, biology 1. I mean, so much of this depends on what the idea of money is, but I just don't think you can. Okay, let's recapitulate the socialist. Everybody gets X value. Could you have a proxy for value which doesn't look like money? You have to have value. You have to have something that you want. It's gonna, even if you don't design value into a system, it will emerge. Just so there's going to be value. There's going to be a hierarchy of values. As long as there is freedom, a hierarchy of values is going to emerge from interaction, society. Okay, let's just take a sliver of it. Let's say, can we design an online virtual society in which money has no part? I mean, that might be the how, is simulating an environment in which money doesn't exist, and then add humans into it and then see what happens. My heart stopped. I don't think you. I'm seeing money as just a proxy for assigning value to things and keeping score. I don't see how biology is going to keep score. Any biological system is going to keep score. Money as a proxy for life and death is better. That's a better way of keeping score than just ceasing to exist. It is imperfect. Okay, I'll approach it from another angle. How could I pay for that movie that I want to see? I could pay for it with $5. I could pay for it by agreeing to watch all the advertising shit that I don't want to watch, which becomes $5. I could not agree to pay anything. other than my attention. So, could attention in and of itself could be a substitute for a currency, be a better proxy than money? Is it just our attention? Is it just our differentiated conscious focus? Yes, don't ask me how.